Steve Bannon, or as Trump famously called him when he was mad at him, Sloppy Steve. I'm never going to get over that. Of all of his nicknames, that's the best nickname. Sloppy Steve Bannon. Anyway, apparently they made up because Trump decided he's going to give him a pardon. On his way out the door, Trump pardoned, I think the number's 143 people, although maybe it changed. I saw one that said like 170, but the article I just saw said 143. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Somewhere in the ballpark of between 140 and 200 people. He pardoned a bunch of people on his way out the door. Now listen, some of that, we don't have the full list yet, but the reports are, some of them are things that we would like. So pardoning people for nonviolent drug offenses, great. Everybody who's in prison for a nonviolent drug offense should be pardoned. Off the list, Assange, Snowden reality winner, because Trump is a gigantic cuck. He was threatened by Mitch McConnell. Hey, if you pardon them, we might impeach you. So he's like, I don't even like that. I didn't know what you're talking about. And so he didn't pardon him. Giant beta cuck, pathetic loser. Anyway, but there's also a lot of people on the list, his political allies and like donors and shit. And so he pardoned Steve Bannon. Now, you might be thinking, wait, why did Steve Bannon need a pardon? He didn't even know he was up on charges. Well, it was a story that came out recently. I believe it came out in August. He committed fraud on a gigantic scale. So I want you to take a look. Here's a news report at the time as to the charges Steve Bannon was being brought up on.
Steve Bannon has been arrested and indicted by the Manhattan U.S. Attorney, federal prosecutors in Manhattan. For more on that, we'll get to our Eamon Javers. Hey, Eamon.
Yeah, Carl, this news just coming out from the Southern District of New York saying that Steve Bannon and 3 other men have been arrested and indicted, charged in relation to their role in a nonprofit organization called We Build the Wall. It's a crowdfunding organization that the SDNY says has raised about $25 million for wall-related funding. What the indictment here is alleging is that Bannon and these others were skimming some of the proceeds from that fundraising for themselves, even though they had suggested publicly that this was a volunteer organization and they were not taking salaries. The indictment document here says that Bannon publicly stated, "We are a volunteer organization." Those representations, the government says, were false. They also say that Steve Bannon, through a nonprofit organization under his control, Nonprofit One, as it's referred to here in the document, received over $1 million from We Build the Wall, at least some of which, they say, Bannon used to cover hundreds of thousands of dollars in his own personal expenses. So, Carl, dramatic development here for a former high-ranking White House counselor. We'll see if the White House has any statement on this coming up this morning. Back over to you.
Wow. Carl, you can still donate. Your donations have a direct impact right now. You can go to the site. Maybe it's ill-advised to give the money right now.
Yeah, I'm looking over the DOJ release right now, guys. As alleged, they say, the defendants defrauded hundreds of thousands of donors, capitalizing on their interest in funding a border wall to raise millions of dollars under the false pretense that all of that money would be spent on construction. Fraud. And they had him. By the way, one of the main reasons they went down is because they kept arguing, they kept saying publicly, 100% of the funds you give us are going to go towards the border wall. 100%. And obviously, 100% did not go towards it. What percentage? I don't know what percentage. By the way, where the fuck's the wall? Where's the wall that they built? And I brought this up at the time. I don't know how people didn't realize this was a giant scam, because you can't crowdfund a wall, because then technically it's private. It's a private wall that you're building. To build a private wall, you need to do it on private property. You can't go to public property and then take private capital and build the wall, because you don't have the right to do that. It's public property. So the government, which represents the public, would need to determine what goes on public property. So you can't just build with private capital, build a public wall, because you don't have the right to do that. And you're going to be cutting through not just government land either. Some places along the border, of course, there are people who do privately own it, and they didn't consent to somebody else building their wall. So there's gigantic legal problems. This would be thrown out of any court immediately. Any court would be like, no, you can't build this. What are you, fucking crazy? Of course you can't build this wall. You don't have the legal right to build this wall. What's wrong with you? So anyway, They didn't have the right to build the wall. They said 100% of the proceeds would go towards building the wall. Obviously, nowhere near 100% of the proceeds went towards building the wall. You heard there in terms of how much money they were taking. There's another guy who took like $500,000 or $300,000, something like that, from it for himself, bought a boat, was at the Trump boat parades with the money he bought that he said was going to go towards building the wall. Giant mess, colossal fraud, sloppy fraud. Sloppy Steve did some sloppy fraud. And so they were caught, and he was going to go down for sure. Like, that was an open and shut case, I think. Now Trump rides in to save the day. And that's interesting because they didn't end on positive terms. And in fact, Roger Stone is really pissed at Trump for pardoning Bannon, because Roger Stone did like a list of all the ways Steve Bannon stabbed you in the back or whatever the fuck, right? So, infighting in Trump world, but Trump pardoned him. It's interesting because I guess he made up with him or was more thankful that Bannon helped him get elected in 2016 or whatever the fuck it was, or their friendship overrode it, whatever. But it's also the case, if anybody understood what he was going through, it's Trump, because a lot of you guys don't remember this. Trump was charged with fraud for Trump University. And in fact, a judge ruled, or judges ruled, I don't know which, Trump has to pay a lot of the people who sued him. He needed to settle with them because there was merit to the fraud case. I mean, you can't, first of all, you can't even just start something and name it a university. Like, there are rules and regulations that, like, you need to be accredited in some ways or whatever in order to be a university. He didn't do that. And then it was a very classic scheme where it's like they upsell you when you go in there and then they promise more and they didn't deliver. And anyway, Trump was knocked on fraud. Trump did fraud with Trump University. So now Sloppy Steve did fraud and got caught. So maybe he related in that way too. I mean, far be it from Donald Trump to relate to anybody about anything because he's such a malignant narcissist. But maybe he was like, I know what that's like. And so he decided, I'm going to give him a pardon. On the list of pardons as well is, what's the guy's name? Kwame Kilpatrick, another corrupt politician. Lil Wayne. I support the Lil Wayne one. I'm happy he pardoned Lil Wayne, but Lil Wayne, some drug charge where he was going to, or no, I'm sorry, not drug, some gun charge where he was going to get like 10 years. And Trump was like, that's nonsense. And so he pardoned him. But yeah, Steve Bannon is probably the most controversial one because he went down on fraud. He was knocked for fraud, and it was legit. And Trump pardoned him. So anyway, classic Trump on his way out the door. Very swampy moves. We talked about how he got rid of the lobbying ban on his way out the door to fully embrace the swamp. So there you have it, man. There you have it. Donald Trump on his way out the door, one of his last acts is to give a giant thumbs up to being pro-fraud.